Hi everyone, Alex Brooker here. This is the first episode of a new podcast, the Travel Tech Podcast, and I'm starting something new. I'm going to be recording authentic, long-form conversations with leaders, with innovators and startup founders in the travel and tech industry. And this is the first episode. I'm joined today by my old boss back at Snowflake Software, Ian Painter, Ollie Deakin, the CTO at Snowflake Software, and then he moved to Syrium and now is doing more exciting things as well. And Adrian McKenzie, an old colleague who also I worked with for many years at Snowflake. And we have a fascinating discussion, which I'd love to share with you now in a few moments, all about AI, about Jevons paradox for knowledge work, where the impact of AI tools and acceleration on software for developers and for knowledge workers. And I hope you enjoy this first episode. In the 19th century, English economist William Stanley Jevons found that tech-driven efficiency improvements in coal use led to increased demand for coal across a range of industries. And the paradox was that as these engines got more efficient, everybody thought that the price of coal would skyrocket and would actually slow down innovation. But what actually happened was, because the engines got more efficient, more use cases than had ever been considered before for the use of steam engines and power were actually able to be tackled. And so instead of causing a crisis, actually, the use of coal went up and more things could be done than ever before. And the link across to AI that I wanted to discuss today was the increase in efficiency of AI and the tools becoming so much more powerful for knowledge work in particular. I'd love to discuss sort of what does that mean for the world of work, for jobs, for software development, for product managers, for business and for innovation. If everything is becoming much more efficient through the use of tools, will that analogy back to the steam engines and coal hold in today's modern world? I'm really happy to be joined today by three of my favourite fellow podcast hosts, Ian Painter, Adrian McKenzie and Ollie Deakin. We've all worked together for many years, but I'd love it if you would just briefly introduce yourselves and we'll get into the discussion. Starting with Ian.
Okay, so my name's Ian Painter. I'm an entrepreneur, retired entrepreneur, I guess is what they call it. So as Alex mentioned, we all work together building a company called Snowflake Software in the aviation analytics business. And then we later sold it to a FTSE company called Relics under its Syrium brand. So we worked together for a long time. The AI bubble, I guess, started pretty much just after we sold. So in that scenario, since actually more just after I stopped working. So in that scenario, I sort of missed quite a bit of this. So it'd be quite interesting to see how the discussion goes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ian. And Ollie, let's go to you next.
Cool. Worked with these guys. I was a previous CTO working alongside these three, been focused mainly on kind of technology strategy for the best part of the last 10 years, professionally, and also just a general tech enthusiast outside. Dabbled quite a bit with AI in more recent years. Should be fun.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ollie. And last but not least, Adrian.
Thanks, Alex. Good to be podcasting with the three of you. So I'm a director of technology. My passion is around growing organizational culture and teams and team performance. And I think this topic leans in heavily to where my thinking is in terms of what's about to happen in the revolution of work. And as a leader, leading people through that, how do I engage with that? And what does it mean for myself and for the people that I work with? So it's very topical for me in my role.
That's fantastic, Adrian. And why don't we start with you then and start there and what is about to happen?
Yeah, well, we don't really know what's about to happen. But in terms of trying to picture the future in the short term, clearly we can see that from an engineering perspective, which is what my background is, the talent that I work with, that the use of AI and agents and everything in that ecosystem is transforming. And I kind of felt like what I learned in computer science and software engineering in the mid-90s, early 90s has held true up until now. And I feel like the way that we approach engineering, computer science, software engineering is going through a complete revolution. So what was the way of doing it for 30 years is going to be transformed. And we can see some of what that looks like using agents to assist us with the development of software and the whole software lifecycle, not just code, but the whole software lifecycle. But where that leads to in the medium to long term, clearly we're not entirely sure.
And thinking about, you mentioned being a leader in your introduction. I think that's a really interesting angle, bringing the hearts and minds of the people who you work with and who are on your teams. What's your view on how people are feeling about this? How are engineers feeling about it as well as other roles, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it depends. Obviously, there's a breadth of emotions that is going on. And I really like your definition of leadership. That's how I like to think about it. Management is affecting what happens in the real world, and leadership is affecting what happens in people's brains. And so trying to understand what's happening in people's brains, I've got some people that are struggling to adapt. And I think it's those people that have their identity wound up in how they do engineering. So they as people identify as engineers, and the quality of the code that they produce is their identity. They're the ones that are struggling to adapt to new ways of writing that code because it changes their identity. Whereas the people that are sort of more focused on maybe the customer outcome or the outcome are just seeing it as an opportunity to get to that outcome more quickly. So there's a breadth of response, as you would expect with any sort of change. But that's what I've sort of identified as one of the blockers or the hurdles to overcome in terms of who you see yourself as and what value you have in and of yourself, because that's the thing that's changing in how we work in the future.
That's interesting.
Go ahead, Ollie. Sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to jump in as well. So what it made me think about was I've observed that there's like, at least in the early adoption, and probably still is, a sort of a quick move to dismiss the tools sometimes on software engineers. And I think what I'm observing is it's because the tool isn't perfect. It's kind of quite easy to dismiss still. It's interesting because I think if you were taking code from a colleague, you would never expect it to be perfect. In fact, you would give a lot of leeway. You'd be quite happy to work with them, pair with them, repair code or help correct things, whatever, in peer reviews. But when it comes to AI tools, which you could treat as a kind of a colleague software engineer alongside you, people can be quite quick to dismiss it because sometimes it gives them, some garbage code that doesn't work properly, but it's pretty close, right? It's like 80 or 90% there. And it's a really interesting thing because you'd never treat a human that way, but because it's coming from the machine, I think people are kind of like, this has to be spot on and perfect every single time. But the tool is amazing in what it can actually generate, but can be quite easily dismissed as a result.
What's your direct experience with it, Ollie? Have you been using the tools?
Yes, yeah.
Copilot or Claude?
Yeah, Copilot, Claude, and it's a mixed bag. I think if you're an inexperienced programmer, I think you can get up and going quickly, but it will not give you ideal code, not yet, anyway. And so I think without a kind of a critical experienced eye, you will struggle to get something that is really kind of excellent or robust or perhaps behaves exactly the way you want to. That said, it is very good. I mean, for me personally, I've been, started out as a software engineer more than 20 years ago. It's accelerating when I write code. And what I find this really excellent at is being able to move into new languages really easily, use APIs or interfaces, whatever it might be, really easy that I've never looked at before. I've never even read the documentation for, and having a conversation and asking it questions about what it's writing and understanding it and correcting it that way, rather than necessarily being deep into the code as I normally would be. And so it's a real change in the way that I'm working, and I'm finding it is definitely an accelerator for me. Now, you might say my skills maybe not quite as hot as some of the young developers around now, but I still like to think I can crank out the code. But it really is impressive what it can do.
What's your position on the difference between writing code that functions versus maintainable code that can be
Yeah.
engineered and maintained over time?
Yeah. Well, this is the crux of it, I think, in some respects, because I think well, we've had this conversation before. I think the challenge comes when you have to have humans working on the same code base as AI bots. Because if you have an AI bot writing code for you, it doesn't necessarily understand the things that make code readable and maintainable and understandable by humans. It doesn't necessarily write great tests either, potentially, but that's maybe a slightly different angle. And the trouble then comes that when a human comes to it, they maybe see some, unusual code, odd structure, hard readability. Maybe it's modularized in a way that maybe doesn't make sense for a human engineer. Um, I think when it's kind of human to human in a team, they can write quite understandable, maintainable code. And I think when you have a team which might be all AI, it kind of doesn't matter anymore if the code is really super readable or is, 1,000 lines instead of 10,000, because the AI will just churn through it. But it's where you have that crossover right now, where you have kind of augmented teams where you maybe bring in an AI bot alongside the human, so that it becomes a little bit more challenging. You start to get some friction between them. Does that tally with what you think as well? Like where are you positioned on it?
I do think that's my thinking about the medium to long term. Like, maybe back to this article. When I first learned to drive, my dad gave me, 1975 car, and he showed me how the whole thing worked. Now, if I go to a car lot and open up the bonnet, no one knows how it works. I mean, there's a few people that do, the design and engineer, but most of us don't know. And so I kind of think that there's entirely possible that engineering will move towards a position where most people have no idea what the code is doing and don't need to know, because, the car still gets me to my destination and I don't need to know how it works.
Yeah.
And I don't need to know most of us won't need to know how code works in the future. We know that the outcome that is the important thing.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think actually what has possibly always been the most important thing is that the behavior is what you want it to be, not necessarily how it's written. But because we have had humans writing it, it's mattered how it's written.
Yeah.
Because humans have to deal with it. There's only so much context switching and messing in code that the human brain can handle. And so you need to make it efficiently organized and well structured so a human can read it. And, human readable, meaningful variable names and things like that. I mean, it just doesn't matter if an AI is reading that. I mean, it probably helps it, I guess, because it gives it some context perhaps, but it probably matters less because it can just read the whole code base and understand how that variable is being used. It really changes the perspective quite a lot.
Maybe Ian, if we could bring you into the discussion now, and perhaps from your experience or more recent experience working with startups and the younger generation coming through, younger engineers looking to build businesses. What's been your experience and your perspective on their view on this stuff?
I mean, I think what's interesting, like just from a general view from a business side, is the one thing that I've thought quite a lot about it is like, when you set up a business, you've got this unique idea, and with that idea, you stay quiet for a bit, you code away behind the scenes, and then you launch, and you've got like a head start, and potentially then you need to really push on the sales to drive traction, and then you become like the market leader. And if you think about like that timeline from like idea to being the market leader, it can be like 2-3 years, maybe more even. That's assuming that you get everything right. So what's really interesting now is sort of seeing that timeline potentially get massively crushed. So it's like, I think the time is gone where you can sort of get a market lead now. I think like the one thing that's going to be interesting to see is how businesses will behave from a point of view of like, there used to be these huge engineering barriers that, you get to market and then your competitors catch up with you, but they catch up with you like 18 months, 2 years later. And by that time, you've got market traction and brand and confidence. It's quite hard for them to overtake you and becomes a very competitive sales marketing orientated thing. But when I look at some of the startups that I've been working with over the last year or so, their time to market is like breakneck speed. They can do things like, and one of the things we haven't talked about is AI, like mock-ups and wireframes that used to take like months and months are literally like sub days. So where it doesn't really care about the logic, but the mock-up and the look and the feel can be there in days. So you can sort of do market testing and stuff really quickly. And you can sort of almost make the customer believe that you have something like way more advanced than you could ever do if you had humans coding it, because it takes such a long time to do it. So I think from a business perspective, that dynamic of like early startups is already incredibly competitive. It'd be really interesting to see how that even works. I can't even, as soon as you launch, you're going to get people like clipping at your heels. And you're going to get multiple companies almost all at the same level, like going to markets. It's going to get very, very competitive. And I wonder if there's going to be, we've talked a lot about the tech side, but I wonder how it's going to impact, traditional sales and marketing. Like, in the business we were in, it was enterprise business. Yeah? It's long sales cycles, enterprise, very face-to-face, like, it'd be interesting to see how that market is going to change as well. So like, are we going to like solve the tech problem, but not be able to, like, how much is AI going to creep into the sales side of things and the enterprise sales and that side of things? Could that become the more competitive landscape? And it's less about the tech you have behind the scenes in your developer workforce, which, to be fair, in our company, we were incredibly engineering led. And it'll be more about companies who are sales led. It's certainly an enterprise place, like sales led and marketing led. Because when I look at the startups that, I'm looking primarily at tech startups. They are incredibly sharp with the technology, but they have very little idea of the sales and marketing. Yet that phase of a business is coming to them like really, really quickly now. Whereas like in our scenario, like when we first started, we were like coding for like 18 months and then we gradually get into sales and marketing. Now, the coding window has gone right down and it's all about sales and positioning. You can get wireframes in front of a customer maybe on the second day you start up. So you're starting sales and marketing like on day 2, which, maybe we should have done it in the past. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic in the go-to-market chain. And I think that's like something very different.
So what do you think sorry, Ollie, if the cost of because the efficiency is so good, the cost of software is so low, you can get something in front of a potential customer on day 2, or a startup can. That means pretty much anyone can. So if everyone is doing that, what's the bottleneck? Is it do we go back to the personal relationships of you have the right contact in the buying organization in order to get your wireframe in front of them? Because there's 1,000 demos all the same. Do we go back to personal relationships again for sales, or is that or not?
Yeah.
Will the buying behavior completely change as well?
I think the larger companies will actually have an advantage, which, from a point of view of like in the past, they've been quite slow to move and they have very large sales. But what they have is they have their sort of, they have such a good relationships with the customers. They already have contracts with them. They're already embedded in them. They have masses of Salesforce and account management that's all in there. So from their perspective, I think that's almost like the hard bit. I mean, I'm talking about business to business now rather than business to consumer. But, in that scenario, where they've previously in the past maybe struggled on the engineering side, that might change now. And I hope that it doesn't make it even more bound to like larger businesses get all work and it pushes the smaller companies out. But I don't know, I haven't thought it through hugely, but it's like that whole dynamic is going to change because of the engineering life cycles are coming down, or the time in front of customer is coming right down. So yeah, it'd be interesting.
What it made me wonder was that it becomes so easy that to build, whatever capabilities that you want to get. Will many companies actually buy it from another company as a service, or will they just build it themselves? I mean, if you can have 10 engineers running 1,000 AI bots just writing code, why would you pay for some desktop application or whatever it is, a convenience tool from another business, when you could potentially just build something equivalent that's completely customized to you inside your business in a relatively short period of time? It's an interesting one. It really changes the dynamic. Then what becomes the underpinning of that is still having the hosting, the cloud service to run workflows on, and the AI services, massive GPU farms that are just churning through, running the models all the time. But it would be maybe less about buying software and services from other people anymore.
I think the answer to the question, the limiting factor, is the human, right? So at the moment, we've got humans control with machine in the loop, and I think at some point in the future will go to machine with humans in the loop. And then I wonder whether at some point the economic activity will be machine to machine. So at the moment, economic activity must involve a human. And because of evolution, the pace of change in humanity is much slower than the pace of change in the technology. So we're the limiting factor. So I think about it like Ian was saying, at the moment, the pace of change from idea to value is, in maybe the best companies, weeks, but most enterprises like months. There's only so much pace of change. Like if you could do what you could do in 4 months in an afternoon, it's still limited by the ability of the consumer, business to business or business consumer, to embrace that. But if humans are not in the loop in the procurement process, it's machine to machine, then it could go really fast. But I think that's a bit further out. Obviously, a bit further out.
Does it become more about the distribution? So if I reform slightly what Ian said about those relationships, account managers, that's distribution, isn't it? It's the route to the market is secured. If you need to build an audience first so that people sort of know who you are, know who your company is, then they would perhaps trust you more than the brand they've never heard of and don't have any relationship with at all. So it's, if everybody has the same wireframe or the same demo that looks just as good, the same beautiful slide deck with the wonderful colors that you can create with all the new tools. If all the decks are beautiful, if the bar is raised for everybody for that, how does a buyer distinguish?
Is it just commodity at that point? Like you don't care which fuel station you go to, it's just fuel kind of thing.
I think it kind of is, because I think also the cost of production is driven down so much by potentially just using AI to produce it. The human cost is often the biggest factor. At that point, does it just become commoditized? If you can do it yourself as easily as someone else doing it for you, it's a completely different view of the world from where it is now, where you really have to buy it because you don't want to build the expertise yourself within your business. You buy from someone else who has it, and then you have that relationship and you go through that procurement. There is a future world where potentially you just build it yourself, or you build most things that you need yourself.
Because you make an interesting point, Ali, because like even now, like procurement is so heavily AI dominated now. One of the startups in Digital Worlds where I was spending my time, they were automating procurement responses. And they got such good traction from that. Able to write like the entire bid. So do you get to the point where all bids are written by it gets to the point where it's meaningless, because the human is maybe on the receiving end, but then maybe there's software that interprets the bids. So like all the traditional processes and buying patterns are gone. And I wonder, like, I wouldn't say it's a concern, but do you remember that phrase in the 80s and your maybe 80s, 90s, Ollie, you worked there for a while, but there was this classic phrase of like, nobody ever gets fired by buying IBM.
Oh yeah.
And I remember in my first employer when I worked there at Ordnance Survey, that was used a lot, and from a point of view of like, we'll just go to IBM. And I wonder if, like, when you get into this scenario where software engineering is commoditized, and then do the bigger players actually have a stronger position? Because it comes down to brand trust, because there's so many things. I don't think there is, because you still got that concept of like, you got to have that initial idea. But you wonder if, like, all these little startups, they come up with these initial ideas and then just get crushed by the sheer volume of competition as soon as they launch, who can catch up with them so quickly. And then some of those have huge brands, and the trust in those huge brands mean that people go to them. Maybe that's a bit more a negative view of it. But I think that's that thing of the uniqueness of idea has always been key for entrepreneurs. And you see some of the huge tech companies that become massive now. They started off as like two people, and they had this unique idea, and they were able to hold on to this unique idea for a huge period of time, and then just grow and grow and grow and scale. But like, how long can you hold on to a unique idea in this world? I don't know.
The patent system is supposed to protect innovators in that way. Do we see a role for that in the future?
I don't think you can. I mean, it's like you wouldn't, as a startup, you wouldn't even think about getting a patent for a little while anyway. And that's the problem. When somebody comes along and just, can copy you in a breakneck speed before you even decided to, file a patent it takes months and months in the UK as well. So it's hard.
Yeah. And the thing is, the patent only really protects the solution to the problem. So you could still come up with a different solution to the problem and implement it in a week and have the equivalent outcome, just done in a different way, potentially. So maybe there is some value still in differentiating between the solutions, possibly. But I mean, we're thinking a way ahead, right? We're not there today, thankfully, but it is quite a shift. Like if I think if AI reaches the potential that it could have, that it's being hyped up to have in the future, then there is a real shift in how we work, what software exists, why does software even exist anymore? And I think there's still a role for technical people and engineers, probably for quite some time, but it's just like a total shift in the way that the world works. So it's substantial, and that's what we're hitting at. It's like, I mean, the reason it seems kind of we're sort of getting around it a little bit is because it's so different from the way the world works today. Could be that it's almost hard to imagine what that looks like. It's not humans talking to each other to buy a piece of software. It's a bot talking to a bot, and they go, yeah, actually, you've got the best. I've compared everybody's offerings in the world in the last 10 seconds, and I'm going to buy that one. It just goes and does it. And it's just automated transactions, and then implements the connection immediately with that service, because it's just possible to automate that. Then it's a totally different thing.
So moving on to view on jobs.
Yeah.
Trying to follow on from that and sort of link to jobs. I mean, Jevons paradox. The reason I sort of thought it was good inspiration for this conversation was that is the paradox, that the greater efficiency did lead to new use cases that could not have been thought of before. Suddenly, you could actually purchase a small steam engine with a belt, attach it to a pivot, and have that pivot run down the whole, sort of just attached to the ceiling along your factory, and distribute that power to a bunch of different machines people could work on. And that was inconceivable before, because the engines were not efficient enough, they were too expensive. And what's the next step here for us, for AI, for knowledge work? Because if everything is that much more efficient, if AI is both creating the proposal and reviewing it and making the decision, are there other use cases for people to work on? Or are we all going to set up Etsy stores creating our artisan wooden sculptures or coasters?
I was going to go 5 years as a plumber until robots kicked in.
The problem that you can only have an Etsy store if you have people to buy from it. And if there aren't any knowledge workers left, there's no money in the economy and there's no one to buy anything. So there needs to be a different economic model at a societal level at that point. But we're a fair way away from that, probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
I think
the shorter term, the more immediate things that I'm thinking about, say next at least 12 months, 24 months, is that the individuals will be, as Ollie was talking about before, working with multiples of agents, and we'll assess human capability in businesses by the number of agents you can coordinate. So the more capable you are, the more agents you'll work with, and that might just come with seniority and experience, and might just come with innate ability. So I think that will be a measure, and what that will mean is that the problem solving will move up. So, from assembly level registers to lines of code to modules and systems to collections of systems. Junior people will be thinking about collections of systems rather than lines of code or modules or components. So the problem solving will scale up. And then my current thinking, and this is a bias, I know it's a bias, is that I think teams are better than individuals, more resilient, more creative. So I think clusters, teams of humans working with many agents will solve bigger problems. But the diversity of thinking amongst the humans will enable them to optimize the agents in ways that an individual might not be able to optimize agents. So I still see a future for teams and individuals, at least in the short to medium term.
But the number of people doing that is smaller.
Maybe no. So I think it depends on the economic activity. If that enables more growth, more revenue, more income, then more things can be done. So it doesn't necessarily mean fewer people. It just depends whether GDP can grow in line with that growth.
Yeah, I feel like you hit the nail on the head with it, Adrian. I think it's the enabler. We have technology has been through many waves of enablers. We are not writing everything on punch card systems and pushing them into computers because we're scared of moving things to a higher level. We've been through many waves of improvements in operating systems, programming languages, and systems and services and applications that have moved us to a much higher level. And this is kind of another step up of that. It takes us out of complexity. And what it could enable us to do, I tend to take a positive view on it, which is that it allows us to do more complex things that we haven't been able to do before, potentially. Because there's only so much that a group of 5 or 6 people can hold in their brains and really work on together. There's a level of complexity that starts to take it beyond most humans' capability, I think. And perhaps there's an opportunity for us to move beyond that by looking at the outcomes that we want and the behaviors that we want from systems and thinking about that. And then utilizing machines that can become more and more complex and more capable to actually implement it or work on the underlying code.
So that being that's a way for us to create this new society, or be able to build things that we just simply cannot build currently because it's too much, too complicated, too difficult.
Potentially. Yeah.
Can now be achieved through the use of those tools. And that's perhaps what the larger number of people will end up doing.
Potentially. Yeah. I mean, if you see it I see the optimistic side of it, which is that it takes you to that new level. But the interesting thing in that is that I think with complexity, with humans, typically also comes more opportunity for mistakes, bugs in code. And what's interesting with AI, because it's been trained on human code bases, is whether it is equally fallible, whether actually when we start introducing more levels of complexity, will we start to see the same perhaps degrees of errors or failures and bugs in the code that we get if we actually had humans writing that. So we might move the complexity up, but there's still a space for humans in the determination of the behavior, the oversight of the agents, but also the testing and proof and the understanding of what you really want from that system, I think, which is perhaps something that, well, AI is not going to be there for a little while, but maybe it will one day. But It's an interesting case because I think again, coming back to what I said right at the outset, I think is that we expect computers to be perfect, but the reality is that the models are trained on human behavior, human code, human writing, and human creativity, and it will have the same failures potentially that humans have, and the same errors.
I think there's also an interesting side. Like we talked a lot about software, but if you think about like our careers and what made some of our software unique, it was always the data as well as the software. So I think that's an interesting angle as well. Like, you know, if like we've always worked in scenarios where our software works on data that, you know, has some form of richness, uniqueness, and it's often the data with the software that makes the solution and makes it unique. So it'll be interesting to see, like, you know, if the software bit is more commoditized, then does that increase the value of the data a lot more, or like more often, more likely is like, you know, other people will be able to catch up with people who have unique data sets. But then a lot of the data sets today, if you think about, you know, Cirium, in their scenario, their aviation data sets were manually curated. And it's I can't see how, like in some scenarios, there are manual curated data sets that AI would really struggle with. You know, so it's like, yeah, there's an interesting balance there with the data side, which doesn't get talked as much about with AI, from a point of view of like, what's that going to do to large data organizations? And then with it, you know, their unique value is often, like if you think in Cirium scenario, they've got good software, but really they make their business through data. So in that scenario, there's a thin layer of software over the top. I wouldn't say it's thin, to be honest, but the value is in the data, and it's taken years. Or if you think about Ordnance surveys, you know, 150 plus years of data curation. You know, so there's an interesting scenario of the data plus the software. And that might be that companies that do have rich data sets, there's less chance of them getting caught up as quick as somebody maybe starting from scratch and just doing a pure software. So they might have more time, I think, in the marketplace to defend their position, to defend their brand, than they will of a startup from scratch that doesn't have any data in the first place. That data is becoming more and more and more valuable because it's driving the insights as the software is getting commoditized. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's a very different asset. I think the current acceleration, and I mean, I flip from these tools are incredible. I can't believe I just did that in 10 minutes. It would have taken a long time, much longer than that before. I flip between that state and this is awful. I can't believe it's still getting this bug wrong. It's got it wrong again. You know, it keeps saying, you're absolutely right, Alex. You've pointed it out. I'll do it right this time. And it does it get wrong again. I sort of flip between these two different positions 4 or 5 times a day, actually. And I think the current acceleration is working well because the knowledge work use cases being tackled are testable. So if you create software, you can create unit tests, you can test that it works, you can run the script, you can do the extraction, you can prove it, you can look at the web page, interact with it, you can actually do full-on old-fashioned style testing to make sure it's working. It's when you get to much more the other use cases, I think, where it may struggle, where it doesn't understand the real world or the physical interaction between things. So we worked in aviation for a long time, actually having physical things moving around, the safety aspect. I think that's where there's a big difference between a testable unit of work that AI can do and something that's actually you need to have real world experience or human experience or decision making in that domain.
Context.
How do you mean?
We're evolving ways to bring context into the, through MCP service. Is this code? It sounds like codified context that's possible to bring closer to the general AI to get more specific outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's definitely that's part of it. Is it codifying the context?
Yeah.
Yes, I know, but I think it's where you have something like a training set. If you took business plans as an example, if your training set of business plans are all quite risk averse, then the AI trained on that corpus will be risk averse, and you can ask it to help you write your bid, and it will answer questions in a way that's actually like very, not perhaps taking enough risk to seize the opportunity. So yes, we're codifying the context, but actually the issue of bias and what data you train on is really important. I think actually humans, it's a very different thing to bring to bear.
It is an interesting one. I think it comes back again maybe to expectations that automated processes will be perfect versus what humans do. All humans writing bids will have bias. And actually what the models are doing is just mimicking the data that we've trained them on. And they will be, actually potentially they have the potential, I guess, to be less biased because they will be trained on potentially a data set that is so much wider than any human could have ever experienced. But it's an interesting one because I think again, and when we talk about regulation and we think about moving into those spaces, I think it's again because we think if an automated system is going to go into a regulated space, it has to be perfect. But humans are not perfect, and we have safety systems and checks and things in place that make sure that they, if something goes wrong or they make a poor decision, that it can be caught and safely handled, so we don't have disasters. And it's maybe, at least for a while, maybe that's the way that we need to think about how AI is integrated into systems as well. It is almost like a very fast human, but it's just as error prone potentially, and just as biased potentially.
Oh, very interesting. Thanks, Ollie. So we're at time.
I had one question, maybe.
Yeah, bonus question, please.
I was pondering. So it is relevant to me in the context of my family. You frame this around knowledge work, and the impact of this on knowledge workers. What would our advice be to people that are entering into the education system around knowledge work, say tertiary? Like there's a cluster of people, like including my daughter, who's at that pivotal age of education. What do we see? What are we thinking about that early careers and knowledge work, and where we're going? Any thoughts on that?
I'm happy to go first on that. So I've been thinking about this a little bit recently through some volunteering work I've been doing, and I think been talking to a few young people as well as my own family and children, remaining curious around understanding how things really work. So from first principles understanding and critical thinking, we take those two things. So I happen to be talking to someone who wants to be an engineer, talking about electronics and aerospace stuff. And they were curious, and they were sort of wanted to unpick and take the model apart and understand how it really worked. And so I think that a curiosity around first principles thinking, how do things work? And then critical thinking, don't believe everything you read, might be hallucination, might look plausible to you, but understanding how to dissect and find out what's the truth of something. I think those two things would be my view for young people.
And you can learn those skills whether you're doing a law degree or an accounting degree or an engineering degree. Like kind of, they actually are the fundamentals of tertiary education, ultimately, hopefully. So maybe that's okay, right? Like there's still this system that's been around for hundreds of years. in its fundamentals is still applicable in that future.
It's interesting though, because you think about what we talked about earlier in the podcast. We talked about it potentially not being long before it's a black box. So you don't need to know the principles and the fundamentals. And, I was talking to somebody just starting their degree in computer science right now, this first term. And, in that scenario, they're still taught like all the basics and all the fundamentals. And that's like, 95% of the course for 3 years that are ahead. When they come out the other end, obviously there's going to be a huge amount of AI content. You think 3 years on from now. I mean, I don't think that black box. It's difficult to wrap your head around how far we are away from that because the jumps have been so quick that you could come out in 3 years' time and that be the reality. I mean, it'd be a stretch, but it could be. So it's a difficult one.
But it's never been specifically about like a language or a technology. Like there's fundamentals that underpin problem solving.
Yeah.
That apply across disciplines, and still depends on
problem solving is different. Yeah, different. But then it's interesting. I think from a techie perspective, like I did software engineering in university, and the problem solving comes out of working through all the solutions. But if you start throwing AI, if you start, using Copilot and all these different things, and you've got like an AI partner, then how much of your problem solving skills do you develop? Are you developing less of them or more of them because you're doing more stuff, but then you're less hands-on? So I don't know. It would be interesting. Obviously, I would go in with a bias I already know, but yeah, it's difficult for all of us because we've already got those skills. But when you didn't have them in an AI world, it'd be interesting to see how much it's doing for you. It's going to do more and more for you, which potentially means there's less and less. You'll have less and less problem solving skills, potentially. You'd be more it'd more be like trying to keep your shit together for not arguing with the AIs. I got it wrong this time, Alex. I'm sorry. I'm going to do it again.
I agree with you really positively.
Final word.
You're absolutely right. I shouldn't have given you that answer. Thanks for pointing out.
People with the most patience will win.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thinking about the immediate future, I don't know whether AI will ever reach the full peak of the hype and the things that we've been talking about. Because there's still an amount of human ingenuity that's going to have to be exercised, I suppose, for us to reach, for the models to come to that level of intelligence to be that useful and be that replacement to humans. We're not there yet. I think at the moment it's still, I definitely agree with the part about critical thinking and problem solving, understanding why you're doing things, perhaps why a particular thing is being chosen, or why you've gone down a solution path, or why you're asking for the behavior that you're asking for. It's always going to be an important thing, because I think it could become too easy to just say, do this thing and never really get a handle on it. But you still are going to have, for some time, humans having responsibility for behavior of software. And the other thing I would just say, I guess, would be to keep an open mind. Get practice in the tools would be my recommendation to anybody going into that education system. That would be, embrace it. Don't, maybe, if your lecturers or people around you are not keen on it, you might get negative perspectives. There might be some people who are still positive, but you see loads of AI slop on the internet, right? And you think, oh, well, these tools are not that great. The best thing to do is go out and form your own opinion through your own experience. And that will stand you in a good stead, because the reality is the tools are here and they're not going to go away. This isn't a flash in the pan. They are here forever, however good they might get, or whether they just stay flat from now on. There will always be a place for the tools from here on out. So keep an open mind and teach yourself about the tools, form your own opinion.
A fantastic note to finish on. Very wise words. Thank you, Ollie. That's fantastic. Thank you, Adrian. That's absolutely brilliant. And thank you, Ian. It's absolutely fantastic to have you three on the first episode of the Travel Tech Podcast. What an amazing discussion.